When I looked at hiring my first person to be a property manager for Base 3 here in Chicago, I engaged a recruitment company. And what I found that was interesting, it was hard to find anyone really at any price, but I was told for someone senior, I'd be looking at paying $75,000 to $120,000 a year, plus benefits, plus tax withholdings. And so when you look at it, you can basically multiply that salary range times 1.3. And I'm also then paying a recruiter to basically go out and find that person. So when all is said and done, I'm paying a pretty sizable number, and I really don't know what I'm getting. What's really interesting about working with people offshore, such as a virtual assistant, is that we're typically starting people in the $25,000 to $30,000 range. And at that price, we're able to provide health insurance. At that price, that is the number. It's not that number plus 30%. You know, I would say that Staffolio for virtual assistants is not the cheapest, but I would say that we provide some of the absolute best quality. And, you know, we're not a race to the bottom on price. I'd say we're somewhere in the middle, but we're a race to the top in terms of quality. So there's a lot of hidden costs with hiring locally, and I think local workforce is absolutely essential. And so again, when I start talking about hiring locally versus a virtual assistant, it's important to note that virtual assistants aren't necessarily meant to replace all local staff. But in comparing the two of a virtual assistant or local staff, you know, I've mentioned in previous videos that you're not paying, you know, $100,000 a year, you're paying $100,000 a year plus tax withholding, plus insurance, plus a lot of these roles, especially in property management and property accounting, there's very high turnover. And so it's really hard to quantify the turnover costs, but essentially with virtual assistants and especially working with Staffolio, you're able to find people that are, I would say on average, 20 to 25 cents on the dollar, and we're finding that there's a equal or superior work quality. Another thing that's really not captured in that general pay range for a virtual assistant is the turnover. If we're paying on the higher side of the market to get the absolute best candidate, we're finding that people like staying with their client, and they stay with their client longer, and they really become a part of that client's ecosystem, a part of that client's culture. I think many people exploring virtual assistants are sometimes skeptical just because the price is so attractive, especially relative to hiring locally. And people have said you get what you pay for. I think what's interesting with how we actually function within Staffolio is that we're finding people who are vetted, trained, and properly onboarded. And so we're just dealing with this unique labor arbitrage situation where we have access to very skilled people that have a great culture and a great work ethic that are just not able to find the same opportunities domestically. While I think a lot of people view this as almost a commodity, we like to think about this as really a team member and someone who can become a long-term part of your organization. Someone with their own life story that's unique and beautiful, and their own family, their own tale and their own path. And that path can become intertwined with your business, and they can essentially help become a part of your fabric of your company. The quality and work of our people offshore generally has exceeded the quality and work of people onshore. The reason being that relative to the market, I'd say we're paying on the high end of the scale, and the people are very motivated. There's just a very different work ethic. So we've found that the quality of work from our offshore team has been in many instances equal or better than some of the quality of work we found locally. A lot of people that are in the offshore ecosystem have extensive experience in customer service, working in call centers, working in other customer service capacities, so they're very good at talking to people. A big part of property management is actually talking to residents. And most of the time when a resident talks to a property manager, there's a problem and they're upset. And so I've found the temperament and the culture of the people that we're sourcing from the Philippines is 10 out of 10. They have a great attitude, they have a good spirit, and they have just a beautiful culture. We have VAs that are like, they're performing at a $300,000 a year level. Like, that's what's crazy about it. Well, virtual assistants are amazing. There's some things that they obviously cannot do because they're not local. And so some of the things that come to mind when it comes to a virtual assistant where there might be a restriction has to do with dealing with local relationships and potentially doing hands-on tasks. Obviously maintenance, not possible, and certain tasks related to facilitating construction, also not possible. While a virtual assistant is virtual, they cannot be here to meet someone for maintenance on site or construction on a job site. They can actually support and facilitate meetings. They can follow up with subcontractors to let contracts. They can coordinate access, coordinate meetings. So to the extent that a virtual assistant can't do the work here, you can leverage their talent, leverage their time to basically streamline your local talent such that they're not spending time scheduling, letting construction contracts, or having to meet with vendors and potentially spending hours on scheduling. By having a very robust team of people offshore and having phenomenal local boots on the ground, specifically maintenance and janitorial, we can basically have someone in the Philippines through a virtual assistant situation piloting our maintenance janitorial staff. And so what's really exciting about this situation is that you can keep the drag of your company relatively low and provide potentially a better tenant service and experience without needing to have an actual physical property manager. Could I have scaled to where I'm at with local talent? I think it's possible, and people do it all the time. I just think the friction and the pain of doing so is a lot harder. I would say historically, I have not been someone who loves managing people, loves managing teams. Like a lot of my peers that are founders, entrepreneurs, business owners, hiring has always been a weak point for me. Like, I have a hard time separating business and personal, and so having people offshore has just made that easier because everyone shows up with a good attitude. They want to be there, and despite some of these tasks being not the most fun, like property management, accounting, we find that we get a good attitude every day, every morning, every evening, every night, and we just find that we just have much less friction. One thing that Staffolio does that I think differentiates ourselves from other virtual assistant companies out there is that we provide ongoing support and training for the hires. We also basically have dedicated portfolio and client managers that will basically check in with our clients and ensure that performance is never offbeat. And so if there are any performance issues, though rare, we want to make sure that we get ahead of it quickly and that we can backfill the role. Because ultimately, a lot of people that are using this are like me. They have a hard time not being the nice guy or not being the nice gal, where they want to be nice, but in reality, you're running a business and you need to make sure that you have performers. And if someone is not performing, the sooner you can replace them, it's better for you and it's better for them because they might be not just the right fit. So for a property management company doing $2 to $5 million per year in revenue, it really depends on how many units comprise that revenue. In Chicago, a typical apartment is generating $30,000 to $50,000 a year in revenue. So I think to answer that question, you have to look at the geography of the properties and really confirm the scale. But as far as what the right fit might look like, it likely boils down to the number of locations and units. I believe that if you have $2 to $5 million of revenue, and that's maybe 50 to 200 units, give or take. Every market is different. I think that the mix would be having one or two good maintenance people, possibly a janitor who can help with the tidiness, cleanliness of the properties, doing maintenance, and then having 2 or 3 people in the office that can oversee rental apps, maintenance coordination, turnover, lease renewal, and then potentially someone for accounting. When I think about every property management company that might consider this, they're all different. And I think that some people may have already very strong accounting people, and some people may have very strong maintenance, property management, customer service people. And so where we can really come in at Staffolio is basically saying, where is the deficiency and where can we really help supplement existing staff or bring in new staff for different roles and verticals within your property management organization you might have not actually already thought of. Someone in my peer group that manages a lot of properties said they were looking for a senior accounting leader to manage a team of accountants. And what was interesting is when I asked more questions about it, it sounded like they actually were working through a Yardi offshoot where they had an offshore office in India that basically serviced Yardi clients. One thing I would say is interesting is that if you use Staffolio relative to this solution, we can actually build the team. We can create senior accounting leadership. We can create the head of accounting and then subdivisions and actually build a real team that's not some offshoot, nameless, faceless group. It can be your team, your business, and your people. When I first started doing property management, having started Base 3 over 5 years ago, I was working with other companies that provided more managed service solutions. And one thing I didn't like was that it was never really my person. It was the person of another company. And so what Staffolio really does that I think is very different and unique is that Staffolio gives you a person that can put your badge on their shirt. They can have your logo, your email, and they can really be your captive person. Well, Staffolio really provides general oversight and is essentially a de facto HR department for your offshore talent. And that's one thing I think that really makes Staffolio special.